Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world, tuning into another episode on Solving the People Puzzle, where we explore the frontiers of personal and people growth, where we look at everything human and everything people. And like every episode, I'm joined by my host, let me say that again. Like every episode, I am joined by an esteemed guest, Sarah Rice. Sarah is currently the Chief People Officer at Skynamo. Sarah, thank you so much for being on the pod. It's awesome to have you here.
Thanks, Francois.
Now, before we jump into the conversation, Sarah, just two things. One, this podcast, as I explained to you, is all about giving back to the HR community, solving the people puzzle. So really practical, technical tools, tips, techniques to give back to our listeners on topics of interest, on topics that people either do or do not speak about, and are really excited to talk about today. But before we get into it, just an introduction from your side, who you are, what you're passionate about.
Okay, so Sarah Rice, Chief People Officer of Skynamo, which is a technology company. We produce a mobile CRM and ordering app for field sales reps. And in terms of what I'm passionate about is very much around how do we create an environment where people can do their best work? And what does that look like from culture, from mapping growth properly, from making sure that our managers have what they need to really create these beautiful environments. So that's what I spend my time and thinking on.
Amazing. And it wasn't always like this, right? You come from a PR and communications background.
Yeah, this is my first official role in the people space. I've been doing it about 4.5 years now. And before that, I spent 20 years in tech startup land, first as a PR person, ran my own PR agency, and then I moved into communications and strategic consultancy, which is where I got into culture and got into internal comms and into leadership, which then brought me here.
I love that because people often think that these areas are siloed and they're not linked, but there's a very definite flow between managing relations, communication, and then straight into people, right?
Yeah, I think people ops is mostly communication. If
100%.
I think about where things fail and where things succeed, it's all about like how do we make sure that we're being understood and that we're understanding what the humans in the business are telling us. So
Yeah.
I think it's set me up quite well.
Fantastic. And, I completely agree with you because when people start talking culture or change management or any of these buzzwords in HR, it always boils down to good communication.
Absolutely. Particularly change management. It's just
Yes.
around like what do people need to hear to feel safe?
Yeah.
And then you've got to figure out how to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Sarah, circling back to the tech landscape, like you just mentioned, I'd be curious to know people and people management in the tech space. In your opinion, I mean, no right and wrong here. Is it different? The 20 years of experience in startups in the startup world, are those humans different?
Um, yes and no. I mean, humans are all the same, marvelous, amazing, incredible creatures who can be petty. And I think in the tech space, the one thing that once I got it changed my life was when I realized that developers were not technicians, they were artists. And
Oh,
the moment
wow.
I got that, I was like, oh, I know what I'm working with now. I know how to communicate. I know what is needed here. And I think when when you're working in the tech space, just the developer, the, the fact you have developers in your business shifts the
Mm,
culture slightly and shifts what is needed
mm, mm.
in a way that is not always so obvious.
Yeah. That's so cool. Artists. I often get reminded, at Whamley we tech business have a dev team of our own, and the one day I was in a conversation with someone about culture and wanting to really establish the Whamley culture and put a big emphasis on it. Um, and this one individual responded and they said, "Why do you want to build a culture in a tech environment? It's not important. It's all about output and delivery and drive, and the devs don't care about that." And we actually went on a little bit of a rant, and it was on LinkedIn. And this person was like really trying to convince me that culture is not important, especially for developers. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Um, so I think culture is important to everybody. And I think people misunderstand what culture is.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't, it's like you can't say it's not important because it exists. So even if no one's paying attention to a culture in a business, the culture exists. It exists because it
Sure.
has human beings in it. So you put more than three
Come on.
human beings into a room, you got a culture.
Mm. Mm.
So saying it's not important or saying it's not worth paying attention to is, I think, insane because
Yeah.
it's the air that we breathe when we are at work,
I love
and that
that.
is worth paying attention to.
And so let's then dive into a definition, in your opinion, around what is culture. I mean, I loved what you just said around it's the air we breathe, it exists whether we focus our attention on it or not, which therefore implies you can't have it or not have it. The question rather becomes it is there. Do you want to be proactive and intentional about it, or just let it be because it's going to take on a form and a body and a nature of itself if you're not intentional about it?
Yeah. So for me, and this is stolen, so it's not mine. Is culture is how we do things here without thinking about it. So
Oh, that's cool.
it's the instinctive way we show up every day and treat each other and treat our customers and treat our work. That's
Mm.
culture.
So it's behavior.
Yeah, comes down to behavior. And
Okay.
then the way you encourage it is all the fun stuff. But in the end, how do people greet in the morning will probably tell you
Yeah.
as much as anything about the culture you have in your business.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think people often ask me what I think about culture, and I say, well, let's just think about what does leadership behavior look like? How does that trickle down? How is it modeled? How is it perceived? And then, super important, is it being embedded and spoken about often enough so that people, one, understand if someone asks, what is the Whamley or the Skynamo culture, that those employees at least can say it. But then, even clients, customers, other stakeholders that we engage with, what is the perception of the behavior that is modeled and seen?
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing about culture is I don't think culture is internal. I think it kind of leaks into brand
Mm,
because for a brand to be authentic, it needs to be reflected both inside and outside a business. And the
sure.
way your people are treating each other and the way leadership is treating them and each other is the way eventually your customers are going to be treated. So if
Sure.
there's a sense of being dismissed or not being taken seriously or like really not being cared about, eventually your customers are going to experience that.
Mm.
So yeah, culture is it's a brand issue as much as a people issue.
Wow. That's so powerful. I think what I love about your summary there is the word authentic.
Mm,
And, we often have this conversation around our culture or clients' culture and the design behind it. So maybe we can help the audience here listening and going, oh goodness, we've never been proactive or intentional about our culture, but we're hearing Sarah and Francis say, listen, it exists whether you are intentional about it or not. And the audience member goes, okay, well, maybe I need to do something about it now.
mm.
Where to start?
So you start with what you have, and the first thing to do is understand what your culture is right now,
Mm,
and that'll come from paying attention to it. So, do you have a social culture? Do you have a culture of silence? Do you have a
sure,
culture of overworking? Does anyone
sure.
ever take leave? That happens a lot in tech startups.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Are you
do you,
available at 6 on a Saturday afternoon?
yeah, is your manager sending you emails at 4 o'clock on a sort of Sunday morning as they try
Yeah,
and get ahead of the week? Are they expecting you to respond?
yeah,
Um, do you eat together on a Friday? Is Friday drinks a thing? Does leadership play golf on a Monday morning, but everyone else is expected to work? So
yeah,
there'll be good parts of your culture and bad parts because cultures are like humans. They live in the totality, and just figuring out what it is, and then you can go into imagining what it could be.
correct. And before we get to that, I love how simple it can be is around just observe. But we could potentially add some other tools and techniques to that to say, ask your employees,
Mm.
have focus groups, do a survey, have small one-to-ones, pods of 2 or 3, little focus groups where we probe with 2 or 3 structured questions to gather that information?
Yeah. Yeah. I find stories convey the culture. So, what is the origin story? That'll tell you a bit about the culture. What are the stories people tell each other? And that can mean, yeah. So we have, so Skynamo has tons of stories. We have stories about what happened the day we got the funding, and we have stories about year-end functions in years gone past, and definitely lots and lots of origin stories, or how the first client came on board, and everything in there will tell you a little bit about the culture. And yeah, so if you can, I think a good way is to gather those stories and find out what people tell each other, and then just investigate what is in
Mm,
them.
mm, mm.
The trouble with culture is you can't ask directly, what do you think the culture is of our business? Because people don't know how to answer that.
Yes. And
But
there's
you
some
can,
sort of preconceived modeled answer that I think I should be answering.
yeah, and eventually someone will use the word integrity, and then you've lost the game completely because nobody knows what that is. It's like
Or
such a
ethics.
suitcase word. Yeah. Um, so I think it's about asking different kinds of questions, like why is it that you choose to work here? If you could change one thing about how we interact with each other, what would it be?
Oh, that's cool.
So starting to really drill into the behavior, or what is your favorite story about Skynamo? When you tell
Yes.
stories to your friends, what is your favorite story
What are
to
you
tell?
saying? Okay. And so now we've assessed, gathered the information. Leadership can look at that, and then the oh my goodness, this is not what we want. Aha moment might happen to you,
Mm,
and you might go, oh, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm hearing feedback and conversations and themes and stories come back to me, which might not be, purposefully or intentionally designed in that way, but I'm realizing that by me being on the golf course on a Monday morning is setting the wrong culture, or by me,
mm.
whatever that behavior might be. What now?
So the first thing is to cut yourself some slack. Like, no culture is perfect. And the
Yes.
second thing is to make sure that you're not trying to define yourself by someone else's culture. I always say
Yeah.
Google's got so much to apologize for. And one of them, particularly in the tech industry, is that it became the de facto culture of technology.
Yes.
And a lot of
Everybody needs to
companies,
adopt it.
so suddenly, like, everyone needed bean bags and food at the office and sleep pods and all the other stuff that Google was doing. And that culture may not be right for your business. It may not be the best, most effective culture. So the first thing is to make sure that you're not adopting someone else's idea of culture. And then to look at what behaviors are going to support your business objectives and which ones aren't, because the culture of a fintech startup is going to be different to the culture of, say, Wamley or Skynamo. We need
Yes.
different things.
Yes.
I don't really want a maverick culture inside of fintech. I want something a little more stable. I don't
Yes.
want move fast and break things at all. Like, I want, like, let's be cautious before we ship this new thing. Whereas if you're in another part of technology, that might be exactly what you need to get ahead.
Yes.
So then to isolate what is needed and see what you already have, and then how to move it forward.
Mm, mm, mm. I completely agree with that. I think too often we go to a Netflix or a Google or an Apple or lately, any of the businesses Elon is building, and go, well, because he or she or they are successful, it therefore should be the culture that they've got. So let me just go and copy that.
Mm,
And we forget context and we forget the alignment that is required, because very often, and I've seen this happen, if you don't do it proactively and you don't design it, as you rightfully said, it will be there. And then the smallest, silliest thing will happen. And if you then just take some time to reflect back why, it can be directly correlated with the culture that you've allowed.
mm,
And so to then go and understand, okay, what is my context? Where are we going? What is required? Who's the industry I'm serving? And also, what are the type of individuals from an EVP perspective I'm trying to bring into my business that will resonate with this culture? Because so often we hire for competence and skill and experience, and we hope that there's a culture fit. We're not
mm,
necessarily even focused on attracting that kind of individual that is aligned with the culture that can flourish in this environment, right?
Yeah, I think that happens more often than is useful. And I always say the culture, one of the ways that you know your culture is what is the worst behavior that your leadership is willing to tolerate. And that becomes the baseline of your culture.
Sure,
And that's one
sure.
of the reasons we need to pay so much attention to it. Because if you're not clear about what your values are and what behavior you expect or want or strive for, then subtle behaviors will come in and erode it. And because
Mm.
most of us are incredibly conflict averse, we'll
Yes,
avoid it and we won't have the language to say, like, that's not okay, man. Like, you got to stop
yes,
that.
yes, yes,
So that's important. And then also, once you've codified your culture, it's much easier to see when someone's not a culture fit.
mm.
Because
Mm.
the vibe is off is not really a good reason to decline someone.
No,
Whereas if you understand your culture, you're able to much more clearly understand why the vibe is off. And yeah, employing for culture is definitely something we take very seriously at Skynamo, because our culture is one of the ways that we create an environment for people. And we want people to thrive here. Like, we want people
yes,
to do well and be happy and be able to perform. And if they don't fit the
yes,
culture, that's not going to happen. And that's as bad for them as it is for us.
100%. So circling back to our process, I envision it, I dream of what it should be. How do I now practically embed it and get it into the business?
You take you do a values process and you figure out what your values are. Try keep them down to a minimum. I've seen some about us pages with like 8 values. Like, it's just too
Yeah,
many. Nobody can
yeah.
remember that. We have 5, and then we have a secret 6th. We have fun as our like secret 6th value. It kind of came in
Yeah,
later.
linking to all of it.
Yeah. So we have 5, and then each value, you look at it and you say, what are the behaviors we would
Yes,
like from that value?
yes.
Like, why is that value important to us? What is the outcome? And
What are
then
the behavioral anchors?
what are the behavioral anchors? So if humility is one of ours, what does that look like? And one of the things it looks like is no one is too good for any job, and we apologize. So,
Wow.
our CEO will make coffee if the barista is not available. The other day I was unstacking and stacking dishwashers because it was needed to be done, and housekeeping was somewhere else. So we all just do whatever it is that needs to be done. And once you know that, then the leadership can start modeling it. And then
Yes.
you can also introduce rituals to display it. One of our values is also kindness, and that displays in a lot of ways, but it also is around taking care, mostly it's around taking care of the human beings. So we have a lot of rituals around when people get married, or when people have babies, or when people have birthdays. So there's a lot of celebration that happens in Skynamo. When
Yes.
someone gets a degree or achieves something, there's massive celebration and awareness. And that kindness for me is underpinning the
Mm,
relationships that we
mm,
build
mm,
around
mm, mm,
respect and care. So
mm.
then you can start to introduce those things, which then are the values in action. And that makes it much easier for people to be able to recognize when they're acting in that way or not acting in that way.
Love it. I wanna summarize what you said there because I think it's so good for the audience. So firstly, culture, envision it, define it, and then start by looking at your values. But these values should not be fluffy. They should be very accurately described and link behavioral anchors to them. So, what does this
Mm,
value look like for us? In other words, when we model that behavior, it should be clear that this person is now busy caring deeply, or being humble, or being supportive, or whatever that is. And then from there, link a ritual that reinforces and models that on an easy daily basis. Like at Whamley, one of our values is supportive and celebratory, and we have a bell. And so when there is an accolade or something happens, we will ring the bell.
mm,
But we've now adopted or enhanced the ritual that you can't ring the bell when no one else is there. And when you ring the bell, you have to explain to the team why you are ringing it. So that again, the reasoning and the thinking behind it and the modeling of that behavior and the embedding of it back into the culture happens. And so often people think it's this massively fluffy or conceptual or like this huge theoretical thing. It's those daily small behaviors that over time there's intention behind it, gets adopted, and it becomes second nature. So I completely, by the way, agree with you. Please don't have 8 to 12 of those. The staff should be able to kind of name them and also understand what that behavior looks like.
Yes. And then once you have the values, you've got to allow the culture to breathe. So we have our values, and then we have almost like these like values adjacent behaviors. So Skynamo runs on food. It's there's a lot of food. There's a lot of feeding. There's a lot of eating. There's a lot of cake. We have Fet Cook on Wednesdays. We have Pizza Fridays. We have Monday snacks. We get lunch at the office. Like there's a lot of food, and I've always said that Skynamo's love language is food. But what it really is acts of service and gifting.
Sure.
And then you allow that to breathe within the values that you have. So culture then becomes more layered and more nuanced.
Yes.
Which
yes.
I also love, and that just takes a kind of watching, and following the people, because culture. The most important thing for me is like who's in charge of culture, and who's in charge of culture is everyone. And then it just gets nudged along with the person who has budget, which in my case is people ops. And a lot of the time I'm watching, someone brings a puzzle into the office and it works. Okay, we do puzzles now, or, someone makes a request. I think we need boerewors rolls on Friday. Okay, that's what we need. And then you just respond. So it's not, you're not like I'm not the culture overlord,
Yes.
manipulating and driving this stuff. I'm responding to what the business is requesting from me.
And I think the other thing that is important is that it's okay for it to also be reevaluated and changed intentionally. We at WAMI recently went through a values and culture reflection period where our values got defined 4 years ago. And we've shifted maturity, we've grown a lot now. And I looked at the values the other day and we're like, well, they're still great, but they don't really reflect all of what we are and what we want to be. And so there was an intentional project that got driven by all of us to really go and understand who we are, what we want to stand for, how we want to be perceived, where we feel comfortable around how we show up every day. And we changed 4 out of the 5 values. And that was such a refreshing thing to do because it creates a sense of alignment back to the core of where we want to go, who we want to be. And that was a beautiful exercise. And then including the team in it, and then working on those behavioral anchors together, and now seeing the rituals being adjusted and new ones being introduced has been such a refreshing thing to do. I think, Sarah, the other important thing maybe for the practitioners listening and if you're interested in this topic is also where to potentially bring culture in terms of the people life cycle. So how we recruit, how we onboard, how we manage, how we develop.
Before we go there, I'm interested to know which value made it through. Which one of the old values came through?
Radical honesty.
I love it. Okay, that's good. So culture really comes alive in the difficult spaces. So the reason we pay so much attention to culture is so that when things get difficult, we've got something to rely on. And the difficult places are onboarding or recruitment, onboarding. Anytime there's some sort of like performance questions and people go into hardcore management, and then when people exit. And looking at the rituals you have here will change people's experience. And the most important for me is how people leave Skynamo, because that creates a sense of safety for the people who stay. I know that when I leave, I'll be treated with respect and with dignity and with care and with celebration for where I'm going.
Yes.
That creates a different level of experience while I stay. Whereas if people are discarded, I start to get fearful while I'm still in the business, and that has an
Yeah.
impact. We know that good onboarding means people become more productive quicker. So how do we onboard people into the culture? How do we take away that tribal fear of being on the outside? When I'm feeling on the outside of a group, it takes up 60% of my brain. I'm completely
Correct.
useless. So
Correct.
the
And
safer I can feel, the faster I can belong, the more productive I can be.
mm,
And then really exposing people to as much of the culture as possible in the recruitment phase will help them make better decisions about whether this is a place for them or not.
yes.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think it should not live in isolation on a bookshelf or on a poster. And as much as it's part of the rituals and the informal behavior and the fun that we've got, it should absolutely be part of the more formal structures, because then it's real. Like, if I find this rock star, but they don't align with my values and the type of behavior that we look for, you probably shouldn't hire them.
You can't hire them.
um, because then that behavior will show up. It will be in contrast to what the business wants, and that will lead to performance conversations, which if I then circle back to, this individual might go, but you knew this is me, and now it's a problem. So often, again, it's not a theoretical, really difficult thing to think about and implement. It should be part of these practices. You said another thing that I absolutely loved, and that is in the exit interview, and that psychological safety around how am I treated when I enter and how am I treated when I exit, and current employees observing that. And then what does that do for your psychological safety while you're still in the business?
Yeah. I one of the things I'm immensely pleased about, it delights me basically, is that our ex-employees come to visit us.
Oh,
So
wow.
people leave, and the relationships are strong enough that most people, not obviously not everyone, most people still have social networks back into the
Mm,
business,
mm, mm.
and we still celebrate. So when we had someone who got married, they left us almost a year ago, but we put them in the newsletter because it was very exciting to know that the relationship that had begun when they were here is now become a marriage, which is beautiful. So we just keep the relationships going, and people come and visit us, and we get a lot of our referrals come from ex-Skynamites. And I think building those relationships means it just shows the level of respect that we have for them as human beings. They were more than just people who produced at Skynamo. They were human beings that we deeply cared about. And that's changes the way I believe. It changes the way I feel about being at Skynamo. And I believe that it changes the way other people feel about it as well, that they are, without sounding too fluffy about it, I just would like people to feel loved,
Yes.
that
Yes.
Skynamo loves them and is doing its best to take care of them. And we don't get it perfectly right, but that we
No,
are
we never
trying.
do. We're humans. But I think the intent is there. And yeah, when you're able to have an ex-employee come and visit you and you can celebrate them still, I think, because at the end of the day, humans are bigger than a logo, right? I always tell people it's not a jail. You have a choice. And it might as well be fun while you're doing it, which is your sixth secret value. Sarah, I want to land the plane for us by asking you, if someone is really passionate about this and they want to go and do it, like, what parting thought could we leave them with to go and work on your culture?
Oh, um, I would start with Paddy McCord's book, Powerful. That's where I
Powerful.
would start. I
We
would
will
read
put
it.
that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's one of the best books on culture I've ever read, and it has real insight into the importance of culture and how to begin.
Hmm.
And then yeah, I would start there, and
Amazing.
then the next thing is just pay attention. It's everywhere. Like
Yes. Yes.
the culture's trying to speak to you all the time. So if you
It's in
start
the air.
listening, it will come find you.
Phenomenal. Sarah, thank you so much for the wisdom, for the share, for the insights. I found it extremely valuable. I think my takeaway from this conversation is that it's real, it's practical. It's like you say, it's right there just observe, pay attention. And then the good news is you can do something about it. Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing having you on the episode.
Thanks so much. This has been great.